Hi everyone, welcome. In this video we're going to learn all about the amazing process of photosynthesis, how plants turn light into energy. I'll break everything down step by step and explain it in a really simple and interesting way. Back in college I was a biology major and I was always fascinated by this topic. Honestly, the two subjects I love the most are physics and biology, and that combination is kind of wild. Let me know in the comments what subjects you enjoy studying, and let's get started. Chapter 1. The question nobody asked. Look at this forest, really look at it. These massive trees, some weighing several tons, stand silent in the morning mist. Now here is a question that most people never think to ask. Where did all this weight come from? Where did all this mass come from? If I asked you right now, you would probably say, the soil. That makes sense, right? The tree grows in the ground, so it must be eating the soil. Or maybe you would say water. Trees drink water through their roots, so perhaps they are turning water into wood. Or minerals. Maybe they are pulling iron and calcium and other elements from the earth. All of those answers sound reasonable. They feel logical, but they are almost entirely wrong. Here is the truth that will blow your mind. A tree that weighs 100 pounds contains about 95 pounds of material that came from the AIR. Not the soil, not the water, the AIR. That invisible stuff floating around us right now. Trees are literally made of AIR. They are taking something you cannot see, something that has no weight you can feel, and transforming it into solid wood. They are turning nothing into something. Think about that for a moment. That tree in your backyard, that massive oak or pine, is built almost entirely from the air that passed through its leaves. The soil contributed maybe 5 pounds. The rest? Thin air transformed into solid matter. This seems impossible. It violates everything our common sense tells us. How can something invisible become something solid? How can a gas become a trunk you can lean against, branches you can climb, wood you can burn? Yet this miracle is happening right now. In every forest, every garden, every potted plant sitting on a windowsill. Billions upon billions of plants are performing this impossible feat every single second of every single day. And this process does not just create trees. It creates everything. Your food, your oxygen, the entire foundation of life on Earth. Without this one chemical reaction, this one impossible transformation, nothing you know would exist. Not the animals, not the forests, not you. So how does this happen? How do plants turn air into matter, light into life, nothing into everything? That is the story we are about to tell. And I promise you, the truth is stranger and more beautiful than anything you could imagine. Chapter 2. The world before green. But before we understand how plants do this, we need to travel back in time. Way back. 3 billion years back. To a planet you would not recognize. Picture Earth in your mind right now. Blue oceans, green forests, white clouds against a blue sky. Now forget all of that. Erase that picture completely. The Earth 3 billion years ago looked like an alien world. The sky was not blue. It was orange and brown, thick with haze. If you could stand on the surface, which you could not because it was far too hot, you would see an orange sun filtered through a murky atmosphere. The oceans were not blue either. They were rust-coloured, filled with dissolved iron. No fish swam in them, no whales, no dolphins. Just simple, primitive bacteria floating in the toxic waters. And the air would kill you in seconds. There was almost no oxygen. Instead, the atmosphere was mostly nitrogen, carbon dioxide, methane, and ammonia. Poisonous gases that would burn your lungs and suffocate you instantly. This was not a world for complex life. No animals, no plants, no fungi, just bacteria. Simple, single-celled organisms clinging to existence in the hostile environment. They lived near volcanic vents in the ocean floor or in shallow pools where they could absorb minerals. Life existed, but barely. It was confined to small pockets, small niches where conditions were just barely tolerable. There was no grand diversity, no ecosystems, no food chains, just simple survival. For hundreds of millions of years, Earth remained this way, a toxic, hostile, barren rock floating through space. Life struggled in the margins, never spreading, never flourishing. The planet seemed locked in this primitive state forever. But then something happened, something that would change everything. A mutation, a cosmic accident, a roll of the evolutionary dice that would transform the entire planet and make possible every form of complex life that would ever exist. Chapter 3. The First Green Revolution. Somewhere in the ancient oceans, a bacteria mutated. Just one tiny change in its genetic code. But this change gave it a new ability, a new power that no organism had ever possessed before. This bacteria learned how to capture sunlight, not just absorb it for warmth, but actually use it as energy. It developed molecules that could grab photons, those tiny packets of light raining down from the sun, and convert them into chemical energy. But here is where it gets really interesting. To power this process, this bacteria learned to split water molecules. Water, that simple combination of hydrogen and oxygen, could be torn apart. The bacteria would keep the hydrogen for fuel. And the oxygen? The oxygen was waste, garbage. The bacteria released it into the water as pollution. Now this might not sound revolutionary. Bacteria releasing waste? So what? But remember, oxygen was poison to almost all life at that time. This bacteria was polluting the oceans with a toxic gas that killed most other organisms it came into contact with. Imagine if a factory today started pumping out a chemical that was deadly to 99% of life on Earth. That is what this bacteria was doing. It was an environmental disaster. It was mass pollution on a scale never seen before. For millions of years, this oxygen dissolved into the oceans. It reacted with iron, turning the seas rust-coloured. It killed countless bacteria that could not adapt to the poison. It was the greatest extinction event in Earth's history, and most people have never even heard of it. But slowly, gradually, something changed. The oxygen began to build up in the atmosphere. More and more of it accumulated. And while it killed the old forms of life, it created opportunities for new forms of life. Oxygen is incredibly reactive. It allows for powerful chemical reactions that release huge amounts of energy. Organisms that could use oxygen instead of being poisoned by it suddenly had access to enormous power sources. They could grow larger, move faster, think more complexly. Over hundreds of millions of years, oxygen levels rose from nearly zero to about 21% of the atmosphere. The sky turned from orange to blue. The rust in the oceans settled out as red rocks we can still see today. And life exploded. Fish evolved. Plants colonized the land. Insects took to the air. Dinosaurs ruled. Mammals spread. Humans appeared. All of this, every bit of it, became possible because of that one bacteria that learned to split water and release oxygen. That ancient organism invented photosynthesis. It invented the process that turns light into life. And that process is still running. Right now, in every green plant you can see. The same basic mechanism, the same chemical reactions, the same miracle that transformed a dead world into a living paradise. Without photosynthesis, Earth would still be that toxic barren rock. No trees, no animals, no you. Everything that makes our planet beautiful, everything that makes it home, exists because plants learned to turn sunlight into energy and oxygen into air we can breathe. This is not ancient history. This is happening now. And we're about to dive deep into exactly how it works. Chapter 4. Meet the leaf. So let us begin our journey into photosynthesis by meeting the star of the show, the leaf. You have seen thousands of leaves in your life, maybe millions. They are so common that we barely notice them. Just green things on trees and plants. Decoration, background scenery. But look closer. Really examine a leaf. Hold one in your hand. Feel its texture. Look at its shape. Because this simple object is actually one of the most sophisticated pieces of biological engineering ever created. First, notice the shape. Most leaves are flat, thin, and spread out wide. Why? Because they are solar panels. Their job is to capture as much sunlight as possible. A flat shape gives them maximum surface area pointed toward the sun. Some leaves are small, like needles on a pine tree. Some are huge, like elephant ear plants, with leaves bigger than your torso. But almost all of them share that flat design. It is not random. It is purpose-built for light collection. Now look at the veins running through the leaf. Those are not just decoration either. They are highways, transportation networks. They carry water up into the leaf from the roots below, and they carry sugar away from the leaf to feed the rest of the plant. Imagine trying to design a structure that needs to be thin enough to let light through, strong enough to stay rigid in the wind, and packed with plumbing to move liquids in two directions. That is what a leaf is. Engineering genius. Flip the leaf over. Look at the underside. It seems smooth, but it is actually covered with tiny pores, hundreds of thousands of them. They are called stomata, and each one is like a tiny mouth. These are how the leaf breathes. During the day, when the sun is shining, these stomata open up. Carbon dioxide from the air flows in. Oxygen flows out. Water vapor escapes. The leaf is actively exchanging gases with the atmosphere, taking in the ingredients it needs and releasing the waste products. At night, most of these stomata close. The leaf stops breathing. It conserves water. It waits for sunrise to start working again. But here is the really amazing part. The leaf has to balance two competing needs. It needs to open those stomata to get carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. But when stomata are open, water escapes. The plant loses moisture. In dry conditions, this can be dangerous, so the leaf constantly adjusts. Opening the stomata when it is cool and moist, closing them when it is hot and dry. Balancing the need for carbon dioxide against the need to conserve water, making thousands of tiny decisions every hour. And who is controlling all this? There is no brain, no central computer, just chemistry. Chemical signals that respond to light, temperature, humidity. The leaf is smart without having a mind. Now let us zoom in even further. Let us look at what the leaf is made of at the cellular level, because this is where the real magic happens. Chapter 5. Inside the Green Machine. If we could shrink down and travel inside a single leaf cell, we would find ourselves in a bizarre microscopic world. The cell is like a tiny factory, filled with different compartments and structures, each with its own job. But we are looking for one structure in particular, the chloroplast. This is the green engine that powers photosynthesis, and each cell in a leaf contains dozens or even hundreds of them. Think about scale for a moment. A single leaf contains millions of cells. Each cell contains hundreds of chloroplasts. So one leaf has billions of these tiny powerhouses, all working simultaneously. Now multiply that by all the leaves on a tree. Then all the trees in a forest. The numbers become incomprehensible. So what does a chloroplast look like? Imagine a tiny green bean, but much smaller. So small that you would need a microscope to see it. It is enclosed in a double membrane, like a balloon inside another balloon. Inside, the chloroplast is a fluid called stroma, and floating in that fluid are stacks of flattened sacs, like stacks of pancakes. These structures are called thylakoids, and this is where the actual light capture happens. The thylakoid membranes are embedded with special molecules. The most important is chlorophyll. This is the molecule that makes plants green, and it has an incredible ability. It can catch light. But here is something interesting. Chlorophyll does not actually want green light. It rejects it. When white light from the sun hits a leaf, the chlorophyll absorbs the red light and the blue light, but it bounces the green light back. That is why leaves look green to us. We are seeing the rejected light. So chlorophyll is picky. It wants specific wavelengths of light. Red and blue work best. Green does nothing. This seems wasteful, but it is actually efficient. Red and blue light carry the right amount of energy for the chemical reactions. Green light would just cause problems. Now imagine millions of chlorophyll molecules packed into the thylakoid membranes. Each one is like a tiny antenna waiting to catch a photon. When sunlight floods into the leaf, these antennas start catching photons by the billions. And when a chlorophyll molecule catches a photon, something amazing happens. An electron gets excited. One of the electrons in the chlorophyll molecule suddenly has extra energy. It jumps to a higher energy state. It is literally vibrating with captured sunlight. This is the moment. This is where light becomes chemistry, where energy from the sun, which travelled 93 million miles through empty space, gets grabbed and converted into a form that life can use. But the plant has a problem. That excited electron does not want to stay excited. It wants to fall back down to its normal energy level. And when it does, it will release that energy as heat or light. The captured sunlight will escape. The plant has only a tiny fraction of a second to do something with that energy before it is lost forever. So, what happens next is a masterpiece of molecular machinery. A chain of events so perfectly choreographed that it seems almost impossible. Chapter 6. The Supporting Cast. Before we dive into that chain of events, we need to meet the other players. Because photosynthesis is not just about chlorophyll and light. It requires 3 ingredients, 3 raw materials that must all come together at exactly the right place and time. First, water. Plain, simple water. H2O. 2 hydrogen atoms bonded to 1 oxygen atom. This water begins its journey in the soil. Plant roots, those underground branches we rarely see, spread out searching for moisture. When roots find water, they absorb it through tiny root hairs. From there, the water travels up through the roots, up through the stem or trunk, up through the branches, finally reaching the leaves. This journey can be long. In a tall tree, water might travel 100 feet or more straight up, defying gravity. How does it climb? Through capillary action, through evaporation pulling from above, through the cohesion of water molecules sticking to each other. It is a remarkable feat of physics. The water travels through special tubes called xylem. These are like pipes running through the plant. They form a continuous network from the deepest root to the highest leaf. And they carry water non-stop, every minute of every day, as long as water is available in the soil. When water reaches the leaf, it enters the cells. It flows into the chloroplasts. And there it waits, ready to be used in photosynthesis. The second ingredient is carbon dioxide. This is a gas floating in the air all around us right now. Every time you breathe out, you release carbon dioxide. Cars release it, fires release it. Even the soil releases it as organic matter decomposes. Carbon dioxide makes up a tiny fraction of the air. Only about 0.04%, 0.04%. That is incredibly rare. In a room full of air, only a few molecules out of every 10,000 are carbon dioxide. But plants need it desperately. Carbon dioxide contains the carbon atoms that will be used to build sugar, to build wood, to build every solid structure in the plant. Without carbon, there is no plant. So the plant has to filter enormous volumes of air to collect enough carbon dioxide. This is where those stomata on the underside of leaves become crucial. When they open, air diffuses in. Carbon dioxide molecules drift into the leaf, through the air spaces between cells, eventually dissolving into the fluid inside cells and making their way to the chloroplasts. The third ingredient is sunlight, light from the sun. energy that traveled across the solar system at the speed of light, taking about 8 minutes to reach Earth. Sunlight is not a single thing. It is a mixture of different wavelengths, different colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. All these colors together make white light, and each color carries a specific amount of energy. The light that hits a leaf is a flood of tiny energy packets called photons. Billions of them every second. Most pass through the leaf or bounce off, but some, those in the red and blue wavelengths, get caught by chlorophyll molecules. So now we have all three ingredients in place: water flowing into the chloroplasts, carbon dioxide entering the leaf, photons raining down from above. When these three things come together, photosynthesis begins. But here is what is truly amazing. These three ingredients, water and carbon dioxide and light, they seem so ordinary. Water is everywhere. Carbon dioxide is invisible and rare. Sunlight just seems like warmth and brightness. Yet when combined in exactly the right way, with exactly the right molecules, in exactly the right order, they create life itself. They create food, they create oxygen, they create everything that every living thing needs to survive. The plant is not conscious of what it is doing. It has no idea that it is feeding the world. It is not trying to save the planet or produce oxygen for animals. It is simply surviving. It is capturing energy to fuel its own growth. But the side effects of that survival, the byproducts of that simple self-interest, they happen to be exactly what every other organism needs. The oxygen we breathe, the food we eat, the stable climate we live in. Photosynthesis is not magic, it is chemistry. But sometimes chemistry is so elegant, so perfectly arranged, that it feels like magic. And what we are about to describe, the actual process of photosynthesis, is going to seem almost too perfect to be true. But it is true, it is real, and it is happening right now in every green thing around you. Chapter 7. Catching Sunlight. Let us start at the beginning. A photon of light, a tiny bullet of energy, strikes a chlorophyll molecule embedded in the thylakoid membrane. This happens completely by chance. The photon is not aimed. It just happens to hit that particular molecule at that particular moment. But when it hits, something immediate happens. The energy from the photon gets absorbed. It does not pass through, it does not bounce off. It is captured completely. And this energy does something specific. It excites an electron. Every atom contains electrons orbiting around its nucleus, and these electrons exist at specific energy levels. Normally they orbit close to the nucleus in what we call the ground state. But when the photon hits, it transfers its energy to one electron. That electron suddenly has more energy than before. And electrons with extra energy do something predictable. They jump to a higher orbit, farther from the nucleus. This is called an excited state. Think of it like this. Imagine a ball sitting at the bottom of a hill. That is the ground state. Now imagine you kick that ball hard enough to send it up the hill. It now has potential energy. It is in an excited state. But it will not stay there. Gravity will pull it back down. The same thing happens with excited electrons. They do not want to stay excited. They want to fall back down to the ground state, and when they do, they release that extra energy, usually as heat or light. This is actually how glow sticks work. Chemical reactions excite electrons, and when they fall back down, they release light. This is how fireflies glow, how neon signs shine. Excited electrons falling back down and releasing energy. But here is the plant's genius move. It does not let the electron fall back down. Instead, it immediately passes that excited electron to another molecule. That molecule passes it to another, then another. The electron is handed off in a chain, moving from molecule to molecule. Each time the electron moves, it loses a tiny bit of energy. But that energy is not wasted. It is captured at each step, used for specific purposes. The electron is like a ball rolling down a hill, and at each level down, we catch some of its energy to do work. This is the first stage of photosynthesis, the light reactions, called that because they require light to happen. No light, no excited electrons. No excited electrons, no captured energy. But we have not answered the key question yet. Where does the plant get these electrons in the first place? What is the source? Because if electrons keep getting passed along the chain, eventually you run out of electrons. You need a constant supply. And this brings us to one of the most important moments in all of biology. The moment that changed Earth forever. Chapter 8. The Water-Splitting Miracle. The answer to where electrons come from is shocking in its simplicity. The plant gets them from water, plain, ordinary water that flowed up from the roots. But water is stable. The hydrogen and oxygen atoms are bonded together tightly. Breaking those bonds requires a lot of energy. Under normal conditions, water molecules just sit there, stable and unchanged. Except the plant has a secret weapon, a protein complex called photosystem II. This might be the most important protein in the history of life on Earth, because this protein can do something that seems impossible. It can split water molecules. Here is how it works. When chlorophyll in photosystem II captures light, it releases an excited electron that gets passed along that chain we talked about. But now the chlorophyll molecule is missing an electron. It has a gap, a hole that desperately wants to be filled. And this is where it gets interesting. That hole is so powerful, so desperate for an electron, that it can rip one away from a water molecule. It literally tears the water molecule apart. When this happens, the water molecule breaks. The two hydrogen atoms separate from the oxygen atom. The chlorophyll steals electrons from the hydrogen. And the oxygen? The oxygen is left over. It is waste, garbage that the plant does not need. So the plant releases it, the oxygen passes out of the chloroplast, out of the cell, into the air spaces in the leaf, and finally through those stomatopores into the atmosphere. This oxygen that gets released is the oxygen you are breathing right now. Every breath you take contains oxygen that was split off from water molecules inside plant leaves. Oxygen that was waste to the plant, but is life to you. Think about how incredible this is. Plants are taking water, boring H2O and tearing it apart. They are doing chemistry that requires enormous energy under normal conditions, but they are doing it effortlessly, billions of times per second, in every leaf. And the byproduct, the waste, the pollution that plants release, that is the very thing that keeps us alive. We breathe plant waste. We survive on plant garbage. This process, this water-splitting reaction, is called photolysis. Photo meaning light, lysis meaning splitting. Light-driven splitting. And it happens so fast, so constantly, that we never think about it. One large tree might split apart hundreds of gallons of water per day. All that water gets separated into hydrogen and oxygen. The hydrogen gets used in photosynthesis. The oxygen gets released into the air. Multiply that by all the trees in a forest, all the grasses in a field, all the phytoplankton in the ocean. The amount of water being split every second is staggering, and the amount of oxygen being produced is equally massive. Without this water-splitting reaction, there would be no oxygen in our atmosphere. Earth would still have that toxic orange sky from 3 billion years ago. Complex life would never have evolved. We would not exist. And yet this miracle happens silently, invisibly, without any fanfare or recognition. Plants just keep splitting water, releasing oxygen day after day after day. Not because they are trying to help us, not because they care about the planet, simply because that is what their chemistry does. The universe is full of rocks, orbiting stars. But only on Earth, as far as we know, does this reaction happen on a massive scale. Only here do plants split water and release oxygen. Only here has this created an atmosphere that complex life can breathe. That makes Earth special, that makes photosynthesis special, and it makes every plant around you a tiny factory producing the air you need to survive. Chapter 9, the electron highway. So now we have excited electrons being released from chlorophyll. We have water being split to replace those electrons. But what happens to the excited electrons as they move along that chain we mentioned? This is where the molecular machinery becomes truly elegant. The electron does not just randomly jump from molecule to molecule. It follows a specific path, a precisely designed highway with specific stops along the way. Imagine a pinball machine. You pull back the plunger and launch the ball. The ball hits bumpers and targets as it falls, and each time it hits something, you score points. The electron's journey is similar. It bounces through a series of protein complexes, and at each stop, something useful happens. The first stop after leaving chlorophyll is a molecule called plastoquinone. This molecule accepts the excited electron, and when it does, something interesting occurs. The plastoquinone also grabs a hydrogen ion from the surrounding fluid. A hydrogen ion is just a hydrogen atom that lost its electron. It is a bare proton, positive charge with no electron to balance it. These ions are floating in the fluid inside the chloroplast, left over from splitting water. So the plastoquinone accepts an excited electron and grabs a hydrogen ion. Then it carries both across the thylakoid membrane. It is a shuttle, a transport molecule moving things from one side of the membrane to the other. On the other side, the plastoquinone releases the hydrogen ion. But here is the key point. It releases it into the inside space of the thylakoid. That space is now accumulating hydrogen ions, more and more of them building up. the electron continues on its journey. Next stop is a protein complex called the cytochrome complex. Here, the electron loses more energy. That energy is used to pump even more hydrogen ions into the thylakoid interior. Think about what is happening. Every time an electron moves through this chain, hydrogen ions are being moved across the membrane, into that interior space, over and over and over. Billions of electrons means billions of hydrogen ions. The inside of the thylakoid becomes crowded with these positive charges. The concentration of hydrogen ions builds higher and higher. Outside the thylakoid, there are very few. Inside, there are many. This creates a gradient, a difference in concentration. And whenever you have a difference in concentration, you have potential energy. Just like water behind a dam has potential energy because it is higher than the water below the dam. The hydrogen ions inside the thylakoid want to flow back out. They want to equalize the concentration. They are pressing against the membrane, looking for a way out. The pressure is building, but the membrane does not let them through. It is a barrier. The hydrogen ions are trapped inside, building up more and more pressure. All that pressure represents stored energy. Energy that was originally from sunlight, but is now stored in a chemical form. Meanwhile, the electron continues its journey. It reaches another chlorophyll containing complex called photosystem 1. Here it gets re-energized. Another photon of light hits this chlorophyll, exciting the electron again, giving it another energy boost. You might wonder why we need two separate light-capturing systems. Why not just use one? The answer is that the chemistry requires two energy boosts. One photon is not enough to do all the work needed. So plants evolved to use two photons, captured at two different points, to push electrons through the entire chain. After photosystem 1, the electron moves to another molecule called ferredoxin. From there, it goes to an enzyme called ferredoxin reductase. And finally, the electron gets attached to a carrier molecule called NADP+. When NADP+ accepts an electron and a hydrogen ion, it becomes NADPH. This molecule is incredibly important because it is a carrier of reducing power. That means it can donate electrons to other reactions. It is like a charged battery, full of chemical energy. So let us review what just happened. Light excited an electron. That electron moved through a chain of molecules. At each stop, energy was captured and used to pump hydrogen ions across a membrane. Those hydrogen ions built up a concentration gradient, and at the end, the electron got attached to NADPH, creating a molecule full of chemical potential. But we are not done yet. We still have all those hydrogen ions trapped inside the thylakoid. All that pressure, all that potential energy. What happens to them? Chapter 10. Making ATP, the universal battery. The hydrogen ions inside the thylakoid are desperate to escape. The concentration difference is enormous, the pressure is intense, and finally the membrane gives them a way out, but not just any opening. A very specific protein channel called ATP synthase. This protein is one of the most beautiful molecular machines ever discovered. and what it does is almost magical. ATP synthase spans the thylakoid membrane. It has a channel that hydrogen ions can flow through. But here is the incredible part. As the hydrogen ions rush through this channel, flowing from high concentration to low concentration, they spin part of the protein. Literally spin it. Like water flowing through a turbine in a hydroelectric dam. The flow of hydrogen ions causes a cylindrical part of the ATP synthase protein to rotate. It spins at about 100 revolutions per second, spinning continuously, powered by the flow of hydrogen ions. And as it spins, it performs chemistry. Each rotation causes the protein to grab some molecular pieces from the surrounding fluid and snap them together. 3 ADP molecules and 3 phosphate groups get combined to create 3 ATP molecules. ATP, adenosine triphosphate. This might be the most important molecule in all of biology. Every living thing, from bacteria to humans, uses ATP as its energy currency. When your muscles contract, they use ATP. When your neurons fire, they use ATP. When your cells divide, they use ATP. ATP is like a rechargeable battery. It stores energy in the chemical bonds between its phosphate groups. When you need energy, you break off a phosphate. ATP becomes ADP. Energy is released. Later, when you have excess energy, you add the phosphate back on. ADP becomes ATP again. The battery is recharged. And right now, inside these chloroplasts, ATP is being manufactured at an incredible rate. Billions of ATP molecules per second, all powered by sunlight that excited electrons, that split water, that built up a hydrogen ion gradient that flows through ATP synthase. It is a chain of energy conversions. Light energy becomes electron energy, becomes chemical gradient energy, becomes mechanical spinning energy, becomes bond energy in ATP. Each step captures the energy from the previous step and transforms it into a new form. This is the first goal of photosynthesis accomplished. The plant has taken light energy from the sun and converted it into 2 useful chemical forms. NADPH, which carries electrons and hydrogen, and ATP, which carries energy in a form every cell can use. These are the products of the light reactions. These reactions happen in the thylakoid membranes. They require light. They split water and release oxygen. And they produce the fuel needed for the next stage. But we are only halfway done, because the plant has not made any food yet. It has not made any sugar. It has not captured any carbon from the air. All it has done so far is capture energy and store it in a usable form. The next stage is where that energy gets used, where carbon dioxide from the air gets transformed into glucose, where invisible gas becomes solid matter, where the truly impossible-seeming magic happens. The light reactions are impressive, but the dark reactions, the reactions that build sugar, they are even more remarkable. Chapter 11. Grabbing carbon from air. Now we enter the second major phase of photosynthesis. These reactions happen in the stroma, that fluid-filled space inside the chloroplast but outside the thylakoid membranes. And they are called the dark reactions, or the light-independent reactions. Not because they happen in darkness, but because they do not directly require light. They use the ATP and NADPH that were created by the light reactions, but they can technically proceed whether it is day or night, as long as those fuel molecules are available. The goal of these reactions is simple to state, but incredibly difficult to achieve. The plant needs to make sugar. Specifically, it needs to make glucose, a 6-carbon sugar molecule that can be used for energy or converted into other compounds. Sugar is made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. The plant already has hydrogen from splitting water. It has oxygen as well. But it needs carbon. And carbon is not just floating around freely. It is locked up in carbon dioxide molecules in the air. Remember, carbon dioxide is rare in the atmosphere, only 0.04%, 4 parts out of every 10,000. The plant must process enormous amounts of air to collect enough. Carbon dioxide drifts into the leaf through open stomata. It dissolves into the fluid inside cells. Eventually, it makes its way to the chloroplasts, into the stroma. And there, it encounters the most abundant protein on planet Earth. This protein is called rubisco. That is a nickname. Its full name is ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate carboxylase oxygenase. But everyone just calls it rubisco, because that full name is absurd. Rubisco's job is to grab carbon dioxide molecules. It is a molecular claw that reaches out and catches CO2 as it floats by. And when it catches one, it immediately attaches it to another molecule. Think about how remarkable this is. Carbon dioxide is a stable molecule. It does not want to react with things. It floats around inertly. But rubisco can grab it and force it to combine with other molecules. This is the moment where carbon from the AIR becomes part of the plant. This is where invisible gas becomes solid matter. This is the point where photosynthesis stops being just energy capture and becomes actual construction. But here is something interesting about rubisco. It is not a very good enzyme. It is actually quite slow and inefficient compared to most other enzymes. It makes mistakes. Sometimes it grabs oxygen instead of carbon dioxide, which causes problems. So why do plants use such a mediocre enzyme for such a crucial job? Because rubisco is ancient. It evolved billions of years ago when the atmosphere was very different. Back then, there was lots of carbon dioxide and almost no oxygen. Rubisco worked fine in those conditions. But now, with oxygen common and carbon dioxide rare, rubisco is working in an environment it was not optimized for. It is like using a tool designed for one job to do a different job. It works, but not perfectly. Plants compensate by making massive amounts of rubisco. So much that it makes up about half of all the protein in a leaf. If you added up all the rubisco in all the plants on Earth, it would weigh more than every human combined. It is literally the most abundant protein molecule on the entire planet. This is why green plants are green. The chloroplasts are packed with rubisco. The chloroplasts are packed with chlorophyll. The cells are packed with chloroplasts. And leaves are packed with cells. Layer upon layer of green molecular machinery, all working to grab carbon from the air. When Rubisco catches a carbon dioxide molecule, it attaches it to a 5-carbon sugar called ribulose bisphosphate. This creates an unstable 6-carbon molecule that immediately splits into 2 3-carbon molecules. These 3-carbon molecules are the actual building blocks that will eventually become glucose. But we are not there yet. We need to transform them, rearrange them, stitch them together. We need to run them through a cycle. Chapter 12. The Calvin cycle, a molecular merry-go-round. This cycle is called the Calvin cycle, named after the scientist Melvin Calvin, who figured out how it works. It is also sometimes called the carbon fixation cycle, because it fixes carbon from gas into solid form. The Calvin cycle is like a molecular merry-go-round. Molecules enter it, get transformed as they go around, and different molecules exit. But the cycle itself keeps spinning over and over continuously. Here is how it works. Rubisco grabs a carbon dioxide and attaches it to ribulose bisphosphate, creating 2 molecules of 3-phosphoglycerate. That is the entry point. Now those 2 3-carbon molecules need to be energized. They need to be pumped full of chemical energy so they can be transformed into sugar. And this is where the ATP and NADPH from the light reactions become crucial. The ATP donates energy by breaking off a phosphate group. The NADPH donates electrons and hydrogen. Together, they transform the 3-phosphoglycerate into a new molecule called G3P, which stands for glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. G3P is special. It is the actual output of the Calvin cycle. This is the molecule that will eventually become glucose. But here is the catch. You need 2 G3P molecules to make 1 glucose. And to get 2 G3P molecules, you need the cycle to turn 3 times. Why 3 times? Because each turn of the cycle processes 1 carbon dioxide, creating 2 3-carbon molecules. 3 turns processes 3 carbon dioxides, creating 6 3-carbon molecules. 5 of those molecules get recycled back into the cycle to keep it spinning. 1 exits to become glucose. Actually, to be precise, it takes 6 turns to produce enough G3P to make 1 complete glucose molecule. The math gets a bit complex, but the key point is that the cycle must turn multiple times to produce a single sugar. And this cycle is happening in billions of chloroplasts simultaneously. Each chloroplast might have hundreds or thousands of copies of the cycle running at once. Multiple copies means multiple carbon dioxides being fixed every second. But let us focus on 1 turn of the cycle and follow it through. Carbon dioxide gets attached to ribulose bisphosphate. This splits into 2 3-phosphoglycerate. ATP and NADPH transform these into 2 G3P. 5/6 of the G3P get rearranged and recycled back into ribulose bisphosphate, keeping the cycle going. 1/6 exits. The genius of this system is that it is self-sustaining. As long as carbon dioxide, ATP and NADPH keep flowing in, the cycle keeps spinning. It never stops. It never runs out of materials. It just keeps turning and turning and turning. Think of it like a factory assembly line. Raw materials enter at one end. They get processed at various stations. Some materials get recycled and sent back to the start. Finished products exit at the other end. The line never stops moving. But what happens to that G3P that exits? That molecule that represents captured carbon from the air? That is what becomes food. Chapter 13. From sugar to everything. Two molecules of G3P combine to form one molecule of glucose. That simple 6-carbon sugar. C6H12O6. 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, 6 oxygens. This glucose represents captured air. 6 carbon atoms that were floating around as gas are now locked into a solid molecule. The plant has literally turned nothing into something. It has taken invisible gas and made it tangible. But glucose is just the beginning. It is the basic building block. The plant can now transform glucose into almost anything it needs. Some glucose gets used for energy. Just like animals, plants need to power their cells. They break glucose back down, releasing the stored energy as ATP. This happens in mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cell. Yes, plant cells have mitochondria too. So plants do photosynthesis to make sugar, then do cellular respiration to break that sugar down for energy. It seems circular, but it makes sense. Photosynthesis only happens in green parts during the day. But the entire plant, including roots and stems and flowers, needs energy all the time, day and night. Some glucose gets converted to cellulose. This is the material that makes plant cell walls strong and rigid. Cellulose is just long chains of glucose molecules bonded together. Hundreds or thousands of glucose units in a row forming fibers. These cellulose fibers give wood its strength. They make stems rigid enough to stand upright. They are why trees can grow hundreds of feet tall without collapsing. Cellulose is the most abundant organic compound on Earth, and it is just glucose molecules held together. When you touch wood, you are touching transformed sunlight. You are touching carbon atoms that were pulled from the air and stitched together into cellulose. The solid mass of a tree is mostly cellulose, and cellulose is mostly AIR that was captured and converted. Some glucose gets converted to starch. Starch is how plants store energy for later. It is like a savings account. When photosynthesis produces excess glucose, the plant chains those glucose molecules together into starch and packs it away. Potatoes are full of starch. Rice grains are full of starch. Wheat seeds are full of starch. This is the plant's way of storing energy for sprouting and growth. But it is also what makes these plants valuable as food for us. When you eat a potato, you are eating stored starch. Your digestive system breaks the starch back down into glucose. You absorb that glucose and use it for energy. You are eating stored sunlight. You are eating transformed AIR. Some glucose gets converted to fats and oils. Plants need fats for cell membranes, for storing concentrated energy, for making certain hormones. Olive oil, coconut oil, vegetable oils all come from plants converting glucose into fats. Some glucose gets converted to proteins. Combined with nitrogen from the soil, glucose can be transformed into amino acids. Amino acids chain together to form proteins. All the enzymes, all the structural proteins, all the rubisco we talked about started as glucose and nitrogen and some other elements. Some glucose gets converted to vitamins. into pigments that give flowers color, into defensive chemicals that protect against insects, into fragrances that attract pollinators, into latex and resins and alkaloids and thousands of other compounds. Basically, everything in a plant starts as glucose, and glucose starts as carbon dioxide from the air. The entire plant, every molecule, can trace its origin back to photosynthesis, back to light being captured, back to water being split, back to carbon being fixed. This is why cutting down a tree is not like digging up a rock. The rock was always there. Its atoms came from the ground. But the tree made itself from air and light. Its atoms came from the sky. The tree is solidified atmosphere. When a forest burns, where does the smoke go? Up, back into the air. The carbon atoms that the trees pulled down are released upward again, the carbon cycle completing itself. Air becomes tree. Tree becomes air again. But when trees grow, they are doing the opposite. They are pulling carbon down, taking it out of the atmosphere and locking it into wood. This is why forests are called carbon sinks. They are removing carbon dioxide from the air and storing it as solid matter. An old-growth forest contains tons of captured carbon. Ancient carbon that was pulled from the atmosphere centuries ago and locked into massive tree trunks. As long as those trees stand, that carbon is sequestered, removed from the atmosphere. This is not an abstract concept. This is happening right now. Every tree outside your window is actively pulling carbon from the air and turning it into wood. Slowly, steadily, invisibly, they are changing the composition of the atmosphere. One tree cannot do much, but forests, grasslands, ocean phytoplankton, all the photosynthetic organisms combined, they process billions of tons of carbon every year. They are a massive global system regulating the atmosphere, and it all starts with that simple reaction. Carbon dioxide plus water plus light equals glucose plus oxygen. 6 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of water energized by light produce 1 molecule of glucose and 6 molecules of oxygen. Written as an equation, it seems simple. C6H 12 O6 plus 6 O2. But behind that simple equation is all the molecular machinery we have been exploring. The chlorophyll, the electron chains, the ATP synthase, the Rubisco, the Calvin cycle. Photosynthesis is not one reaction. It is a symphony of reactions. Dozens of steps, each precisely timed, each dependent on the others. And this symphony plays out billions of times per second in every green leaf on the planet. Chapter 14. The Oxygen Story. We have talked about glucose, about carbon, about how plants make food. But we have not fully appreciated the other product of photosynthesis, the waste product that plants throw away. Oxygen. Every time photosynthesis happens, oxygen is released. 6 molecules of oxygen for every 1 molecule of glucose produced. These oxygen molecules exit the chloroplast, leave the cell, pass through the air spaces in the leaf, and diffuse out through the stomata into the atmosphere. This oxygen is literally waste. The plant split water to get hydrogen and electrons. It did not want the oxygen. It just throws it away, pollutes the environment with it. But this pollution is our life. Every breath you take, you are breathing plant waste. You are inhaling the garbage that plants discard. Think about that for a moment. You are alive because plants produce waste. If photosynthesis was more efficient, if plants could use oxygen instead of discarding it, we would not exist. Complex animal life would be impossible. We are living off plant garbage. Our entire existence depends on the inefficiency of plant metabolism. That is both humbling and remarkable. How much oxygen do plants produce? One large tree, a mature oak or maple, produces enough oxygen for about 2 people for an entire year. That is roughly 260 pounds of oxygen annually from one tree. But wait, trees also use oxygen. They do cellular respiration, breaking down glucose for energy, which consumes oxygen. So do trees actually produce net oxygen? The answer is yes, but mostly when they are young and growing. A growing tree is building wood, which means it is fixing more carbon than it is releasing. It is producing more oxygen than it consumes. An old, mature tree in equilibrium produces and consumes roughly equal amounts. But the overall forest? Forests are absolutely net oxygen producers. All the young trees, all the shrubs, all the grasses underneath, all of them combined produce far more oxygen than they consume. Now expand the view globally. The Amazon rainforest is often called the lungs of the earth. This is somewhat misleading because mature forests produce less net oxygen than people think. But the Amazon is still crucial because it stores massive amounts of carbon and supports incredible biodiversity. But if you want to talk about oxygen production, we need to look at the oceans, specifically at phytoplankton. These are microscopic photosynthetic organisms floating near the surface. Tiny algae, cyanobacteria, so small you cannot see individual cells without a microscope. These organisms collectively produce between 50 and 80% of Earth's oxygen, more than half, maybe even 3/4. The oceans, not the forests, are the true lungs of the planet. This is shocking to most people. We think of oxygen coming from trees, but actually it comes mostly from invisible floating cells in the sea, organisms so small that thousands could fit on a pinhead. Yet these microscopic beings, through photosynthesis, the same process we have been exploring, they oxygenate the entire planet. They have been doing this for billions of years. They created the oxygen-rich atmosphere that allowed life to leave the oceans and colonize land. Here is another mind-blowing fact. The oxygen you are breathing right now is probably not new. Oxygen molecules last in the atmosphere for about 4,000 years on average. So the oxygen entering your lungs right now was produced by some plant or phytoplankton thousands of years ago. You might be breathing oxygen that was produced during the time of ancient Rome, or ancient Egypt, or even earlier. Oxygen that has circulated through countless lungs, been absorbed by countless creatures before reaching you. This oxygen came from water molecules that were split apart by photosynthesis thousands of years ago. The hydrogen from those water molecules became part of plants, was eaten, was metabolized, eventually returned to the soil and back to water. But the oxygen floated free, traveling the globe until it found its way to you. And when you exhale, you release carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide will be absorbed by a plant somewhere. Maybe tomorrow, maybe years from now. It will be converted to glucose, to cellulose, to wood. The carbon atom that was in your body will become part of a tree. Eventually, that tree will die. It will decompose or burn. The carbon will be released back to the atmosphere. And the cycle continues. Carbon flowing from air to plant to animal to air again. Oxygen flowing from water to air to animal to water again. These cycles have been running for billions of years. Every atom of carbon and oxygen in your body has been through these cycles countless times. You are made of recycled atoms, ancient atoms, star atoms that have been cycling through the biosphere since life began. And photosynthesis is the engine that drives these cycles. Without it, the cycles would stop. Carbon would accumulate as carbon dioxide, oxygen would disappear from the air, the biosphere would collapse. Photosynthesis is not just a neat trick. It is the foundation of life on Earth. It is the process that makes everything else possible. Chapter 15. The Food Chain Foundation. Let us talk about food chains. Every ecology textbook shows them. Grass is eaten by a rabbit. Rabbit is eaten by a fox. Fox dies and decomposes, feeding the soil, which grows more grass. A simple cycle. But every food chain, every food web, every ecological relationship starts with photosynthesis. Every single one. No exceptions. Herbivores eat plants directly. They are eating glucose that was made by photosynthesis. They are eating captured sunlight. When a cow eats grass, it is consuming solar energy that was converted to chemical energy by the grass. The cow digests that grass, breaks it down into glucose, and uses that glucose for energy. The cow breathes oxygen produced by plants. The cow's entire existence depends on photosynthesis happening somewhere nearby. Carnivores eat herbivores. A wolf eating a rabbit is eating an animal that ate plants. The wolf is consuming second-hand sunlight. The energy that powers the wolf's muscles originally came from the sun, was captured by plants, was eaten by the rabbit, and is now being transferred to the wolf. Predators eating carnivores are consuming third-hand sunlight. Each step away from plants represents a transfer of energy that originated in photosynthesis. Even decomposers, bacteria, and fungi breaking down dead matter. They are releasing energy that originally came from the sun. A mushroom growing on a dead log is feeding on wood, which is cellulose, which is glucose chains, which came from photosynthesis. Every calorie of food energy on planet Earth can be traced back to photosynthesis. Every single calorie. There are no exceptions. What about deep-sea creatures living near volcanic vents? They use chemosynthesis, right? Making food from chemicals rather than light? True, chemosynthetic bacteria near hydrothermal vents convert chemical energy to food without light. But these ecosystems are tiny compared to the photosynthetic world. They are isolated exceptions. The vast majority of life on Earth is directly or indirectly dependent on photosynthesis. Even humans. Everything you eat ultimately came from photosynthesis. Vegetables? Obviously. Fruits? Obviously. Grains? made by photosynthetic plants. Meat? That animal ate plants or ate animals that ate plants. Dairy? From cows that eat grass. Eggs? From chickens that eat grain. Even processed foods. That candy bar? Sugar from sugarcane or beets. Both photosynthetic. The chocolate? From cacao beans. Photosynthesis. The flour? From wheat. Photosynthesis. The oil? From soybeans or corn or olives. All photosynthesis. Look at your last meal. No matter what you ate, you can trace every ingredient back to plants, back to photosynthesis, back to sunlight being captured and converted to chemical energy. You are a solar-powered organism. You just have to eat plants or animals to access that solar energy. You cannot do photosynthesis yourself, but you are utterly dependent on organisms that can. And here is something even more remarkable. The fossil fuels we burn, oil and coal and natural gas, they are ancient sunlight. Compressed, transformed, buried for millions of years, but originally they were photosynthetic organisms. Coal comes from ancient forests, trees that grew hundreds of millions of years ago during the Carboniferous period. These trees grew through photosynthesis. They captured sunlight and turned it into wood. When they died, they fell into swamps. Over millions of years, they were compressed and heated, transforming into coal. When we burn coal, we are releasing energy that was captured by photosynthesis 300 million years ago. Sunlight from the age of dinosaurs, locked in rock, now being released. Oil comes from ancient marine organisms, mostly phytoplankton and algae, tiny photosynthetic cells that lived in prehistoric oceans. When they died, they sank to the ocean floor. Layer upon layer built up. Pressure and heat transformed them into crude oil. When we burn oil, we are releasing energy from photosynthesis that happened millions of years ago. Ancient sunlight stored underground, brought back to the surface. Natural gas has a similar origin. Ancient organisms, photosynthesis, compression, transformation, storage. So even the energy powering our modern civilization, the energy running our cars and factories and power plants, that is solar energy. Just very old solar energy that was captured by photosynthesis long before humans existed. The entire human economy runs on sunlight. Current sunlight captured by agriculture, ancient sunlight captured by fossil fuels, solar panels directly capturing sunlight, wind turbines powered by air movements caused by uneven solar heating of Earth's surface. It all comes back to the sun, and on Earth the primary way we capture solar energy is through photosynthesis. This makes photosynthesis not just biologically crucial, but economically and civilizationally crucial as well. Chapter 16. The Carbon Cycle Connection. Now let us zoom out even further and look at the carbon cycle. This is the global circulation of carbon atoms through the biosphere. Carbon cycles between the atmosphere, the oceans, the land, and living organisms. It exists in many forms, as carbon dioxide gas, as dissolved carbonic acid in water, as limestone rock, as organic compounds in living tissue, as fossil fuels underground. Photosynthesis is a key player in this cycle. It is the main process that removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Plants absorb CO2 through their stomata, fix it through the Calvin cycle, and lock it into organic molecules. As long as those organic molecules exist, that carbon is sequestered, removed from the air. A tree contains tons of carbon that used to be atmospheric CO2 but is now solid wood. But carbon does not stay locked up forever. Eventually, organisms die. They decompose. Bacteria and fungi break down the organic matter. This decomposition releases carbon dioxide back to the atmosphere. Animals also release carbon dioxide. Every time you breathe out, you are exhaling CO2. That carbon came from food you ate. That food came from plants or animals that ate plants. That carbon was originally pulled from the air by photosynthesis. Now you are returning it. Fires release carbon dioxide. When wood burns, the carbon in cellulose combines with oxygen and is released as CO2. That carbon returns to the atmosphere. For most of Earth's history, these processes were roughly balanced. Photosynthesis removed carbon from the air at about the same rate that respiration, decomposition and fires returned it. The atmospheric concentration of CO2 remained relatively stable. There were fluctuations, of course. During ice ages, more carbon was locked up in the oceans and on land. CO2 levels dropped. During warm periods, more carbon was released. CO2 levels rose, but overall, the system was balanced. Then something new happened. Humans discovered fossil fuels. We started digging up coal, pumping out oil, extracting natural gas. We started burning this ancient stored carbon. Remember, fossil fuels are ancient photosynthesis. Carbon that was removed from the atmosphere millions of years ago. That carbon had been safely locked underground, out of circulation. But now we are releasing it, burning it, sending it back to the atmosphere. We are taking carbon that was removed from the cycle and putting it back in. And we are doing this fast, faster than photosynthesis can compensate. Plants are still absorbing CO2. Oceans are still absorbing CO2. But we are releasing it faster than these natural processes can remove it. The result? Atmospheric CO2 concentrations are rising. Before the Industrial Revolution, atmospheric CO2 was about 280 parts per million. Now it is over 420 parts per million. That is a 50% increase. This additional CO2 is a problem because CO2 is a greenhouse gas. It traps heat in the atmosphere. More CO2 means more heat retention. Global temperatures rise, climate patterns shift, ice melts, sea levels rise. Photosynthesis is trying to help. Plants are actually growing faster in some areas due to higher CO2. This is called CO2 fertilization. More carbon dioxide means plants can do more photosynthesis, can grow larger and faster. But this does not solve the problem. We are releasing carbon far faster than plants can absorb it. We would need to plant billions more trees to offset current emissions. And even then, trees take decades to grow. Plus, higher temperatures and changing rainfall patterns are harming plants in many regions. Droughts kill forests. Heat stress reduces photosynthesis efficiency. Some areas are becoming less green even as CO2 rises. The oceans are also absorbing extra CO2. About 30% of our emissions go into the sea. This helps reduce atmospheric buildup, but it causes a different problem. When CO2 dissolves in water, it forms carbonic acid. This makes the oceans more acidic. Ocean acidification harms marine life, especially organisms with calcium carbonate shells. Coral reefs are dying. Shellfish struggle to build shells. The marine food web is disrupted. And remember, marine phytoplankton produce most of Earth's oxygen. If ocean conditions deteriorate too much, phytoplankton populations could decline. Less photosynthesis in the ocean means less oxygen production. This is not hypothetical doom-mongering. These changes are measurable. They are happening now. The carbon cycle is out of balance. Photosynthesis is working as hard as it can, but it cannot keep up with the rate at which we are releasing ancient carbon. The solution requires reducing emissions, using less fossil fuel, transitioning to renewable energy. But it also requires protecting and expanding photosynthetic capacity, preserving forests, restoring degraded lands, protecting ocean ecosystems. Because photosynthesis is not just about making food and oxygen. It is about regulating the atmosphere. It is about maintaining the carbon balance that keeps climate stable. For billions of years, photosynthesis has been quietly regulating Earth's atmosphere, removing CO2, adding oxygen, keeping conditions suitable for life. And it is still doing that job right now, every day, without anyone asking it to. We owe our existence to photosynthesis. And now, as we disrupt the carbon cycle, we need photosynthesis more than ever. Not just to feed us, not just to give us oxygen, but to help stabilize a climate system that we have knocked out of balance. This is the bigger picture. Photosynthesis is not just a chemical reaction in a leaf. It is a global process that shapes the entire planet, that maintains conditions for life, that connects the atmosphere to the biosphere, to the oceans, to the land. Every plant is part of this massive planetary system. Every leaf is a tiny component in the Earth's life support machinery. And that makes every plant, every tree, every blade of grass incredibly valuable, not just as a resource, but as a partner in maintaining the habitability of our world. Chapter 17. Desert Survivors. CAM photosynthesis. So far, we have been describing standard photosynthesis, the process used by most plants. But evolution does not create just one solution to a problem. It creates many solutions adapted to different environments. Some plants face a serious challenge. They live in deserts, hot, dry places where water is scarce. And remember, photosynthesis requires opening stomata to let carbon dioxide in. But open stomata also let water out. In a moist environment, this is fine. The plant can afford to lose some water, but in a desert, every drop of water is precious. Opening stomata during the heat of the day would cause the plant to dry out and die. So some desert plants evolved a clever solution. They open their stomata at night instead of during the day, when it is cool, when humidity is higher, when water loss is minimized. But wait, photosynthesis needs light. How can plants do photosynthesis at night? They cannot, not directly, but they found a workaround. At night, when stomata are open, the plant absorbs carbon dioxide from the air. But instead of immediately running it through the Calvin cycle, the plant stores it. The carbon dioxide is converted into a 4-carbon organic acid called malic acid. This acid is stored in large vacuoles inside cells. Basically, the plant is stockpiling CO2 in a stable form. During the day, the stomata close. No water escapes, no carbon dioxide enters, but the plant has stored CO2 from the night before. It releases that CO2 from malic acid and feeds it to rubisco. The Calvin cycle runs normally producing glucose, so the light reactions happen during the day using sunlight. The carbon fixation happens during the day using stored CO2, but the CO2 was actually collected at night when conditions were favorable. This strategy is called CAM photosynthesis. CAM stands for crassulacean acid metabolism. It is named after the family Crassulaceae, which includes many succulent plants that use this method. Cacti use CAM photosynthesis. So do agaves, pineapples, many orchids, jade plants, snake plants, any plant adapted to arid conditions or places with seasonal droughts. CAM photosynthesis is slower than regular photosynthesis. The plant can only process as much CO2 as it managed to store the night before. It cannot access unlimited CO2 from the air during the day like regular plants can. So CAM plants grow more slowly. They do not get as large, but they survive. They can live in deserts where regular plants would quickly die. They trade growth speed for water efficiency. This is a beautiful example of evolutionary adaptation. The basic mechanism of photosynthesis remains the same. Chlorophyll, light reactions, Calvin cycle, all the molecular machinery is identical. But the timing has been changed. The schedule has been rearranged to fit a different environment. Evolution does not redesign everything from scratch. It modifies existing systems. It takes what works and tweaks it. CAM photosynthesis is regular photosynthesis with a scheduling change. But that simple change allows life to exist in places that would otherwise be too harsh. Chapter 18. Tropical Speedsters. C4 Photosynthesis. Now let us look at another variation. This one is adapted to hotty tropical environments, not necessarily dry like deserts, but very hot. Think tropical grasslands, savannas, places where temperature regularly exceeds 90 degrees Fahrenheit. In hot conditions, plants face a different problem. Remember rubisco, that enzyme that grabs carbon dioxide? Well, rubisco has a flaw. When it is hot, it makes mistakes. Rubisco is supposed to grab carbon dioxide, but sometimes, especially when hot, it grabs oxygen instead. This is called photorespiration, and it is a problem because grabbing oxygen wastes energy. The plant uses ATP and NADPH, but produces no glucose. In moderate temperatures, this is not a big deal. Rubisco mostly grabs CO2 correctly. But in hot conditions, the error rate increases dramatically. 30% or more of rubisco's captures might be oxygen instead of carbon dioxide. The plant wastes massive amounts of energy. Some plants evolved a solution. They developed a preliminary step before the Calvin cycle. They use a different enzyme called PEP carboxylase to do the initial carbon capture. PEP carboxylase does not make mistakes. It only grabs carbon dioxide, never oxygen. It is very specific and very efficient. When it catches CO2, it attaches it to a 3-carbon molecule, creating a 4-carbon compound. Hence the name C4 photosynthesis. This 4-carbon compound is then transported to special cells deep inside the leaf. These cells are called bundle sheath cells. They form a ring around the leaf veins. Inside bundle sheath cells, the 4-carbon compound releases its CO2. This creates a high concentration of carbon dioxide in a localized area. The local CO2 concentration might be 10 to 100 times higher than normal. Now, Rubisco does its job. But here is the key. Because CO2 concentration is so high and oxygen concentration is relatively low, Rubisco makes almost no mistakes. It grabs carbon dioxide nearly 100% of the time. The Calvin cycle runs normally in these bundle sheath cells. Glucose is produced. And because Rubisco is not wasting energy on oxygen captures, the process is much more efficient in hot conditions. C4 photosynthesis is used by many tropical grasses. Corn is a C4 plant. Sugarcane is C4. Sorghum, millet, many savanna grasses. These plants thrive in heat. In fact, C4 plants are more efficient than regular C3 plants when temperatures are hot and light is intense. They grow faster. They produce more biomass. They can outcompete C3 plants in tropical conditions. But C4 photosynthesis requires extra machinery, an extra enzyme, special bundle sheath cells, extra energy to transport the 4-carbon compound around. This overhead means C4 is less efficient in cool conditions, so evolution produced a trade-off. C3 photosynthesis is better in cool climates. C4 is better in hot climates. Each strategy is optimized for different conditions. Look at global vegetation patterns and you will see this. Temperate forests are mostly C3. Tropical grasslands are mostly C4. Each type of photosynthesis dominates in the environment it is best suited for. Again, this is not a redesign of photosynthesis. It is a modification. The core process is identical. Light reactions, Calvin cycle, glucose production. But an extra preliminary step was added to improve efficiency under specific conditions. Evolution is a tinkerer. It does not create perfection. It creates good enough solutions that are slightly better than the competition. C4 photosynthesis is not perfect. It has overhead costs. But in hot environments, it is better than the alternative. And that is enough. That slight advantage means C4 plants spread. They thrive. They take over niches where C3 plants struggle. The diversity of life increases. The biosphere becomes richer and more complex. Chapter 19, the carnivorous exception. Now let us look at one final variation. The plants that seem to break the rules. Carnivorous plants. Venus flytraps, pitcher plants, sundews, bladderworts. These plants eat insects. They trap them, digest them, absorb nutrients from them. This seems contrary to everything we have said about photosynthesis being the source of energy for plants. But here is the important point. Carnivorous plants still do photosynthesis. They still have chlorophyll. They still have chloroplasts. They still capture sunlight and produce glucose. The insects are not providing energy. They are providing nutrients, specifically nitrogen and phosphorus. You see, carnivorous plants typically live in nutrient-poor soil. Bogs, swamps, sandy soils, places where nitrogen and phosphorus are scarce. These elements are essential for making proteins, DNA, and other crucial molecules. Most plants get nitrogen and phosphorus from the soil through their roots. But in nutrient-poor environments, there is not enough in the soil. The plant is starved for these elements, even though it has plenty of light and water for photosynthesis. So carnivorous plants found an alternative source. Prey. Insects contain proteins which contain nitrogen. Insect bodies contain phosphorus. By catching and digesting insects, the plant can obtain these scarce nutrients. The plant still makes its own glucose through photosynthesis, but it supplements with insect-derived nutrients that it cannot get from the soil. It is not giving up photosynthesis. It is supplementing it. This is remarkable adaptation. The plant evolved elaborate trapping mechanisms. Snap traps like Venus flytraps that close in a fraction of a second when triggered. Slippery pitcher traps that insects fall into. Sticky traps like sundews that glue insects in place. The plant also evolved the ability to produce digestive enzymes. These break down insect proteins into amino acids that can be absorbed. The plant essentially developed a stomach on the outside of its body. All this complexity evolved because of nutrient scarcity. In a nutrient-rich environment, carnivorous plants have no advantage. In fact, they are at a disadvantage because all that trapping and digesting machinery costs energy to maintain. But in nutrient-poor bogs, carnivorous plants thrive. They can grow where other plants cannot. They access a resource, insect bodies, that other plants ignore. They found a niche. This shows the flexibility of evolution. Photosynthesis is the base, but evolution can build additional capabilities on top of that base. It can add features, it can specialize, it can adapt to specific local conditions. The fact that some plants eat insects does not change the fundamental importance of photosynthesis. Even carnivorous plants are ultimately solar-powered. They just have a secondary nutrient source to overcome a specific environmental limitation. Chapter 20. Why this matters to you. Right now, we have covered a lot. The molecular machinery, the chemistry, the global cycles, the evolutionary variations. But let us bring this back to you, sitting there, right now. Why does any of this matter? Take a breath. Right now. Breathe in. Feel the air filling your lungs. About 21% of that air is oxygen. That oxygen came from photosynthesis. Every single oxygen molecule you just inhaled was produced by a plant or phytoplankton splitting water. Without photosynthesis, you would suffocate in minutes. There would be no oxygen to breathe. The atmosphere would be toxic. You would not exist. Now think about the last thing you ate. Breakfast, lunch, a snack. Whatever it was, trace its ingredients back. Every single one came from photosynthesis. The bread from wheat, the fruit from trees, the vegetables from gardens, the meat from animals that ate plants. Without photosynthesis, you would starve. There would be no food, no crops, no animals, nothing to eat. You would not exist. Look around you. The wood in furniture, the cotton in clothes, the paper in books, the rubber in tires, all of these came from plants, from photosynthesis, from sunlight being converted to matter. Without photosynthesis, our civilization would collapse. No agriculture, no forestry, no plant-based materials. Our entire economy depends on this process. Think about the climate, the temperature outside, the weather patterns. Photosynthesis has been regulating atmospheric CO2 for billions of years. It is still doing that job, still pulling carbon from the air, still stabilizing climate. Without photosynthesis acting as a carbon sink, climate change would be even worse than it already is. Plants are fighting to keep the atmosphere balanced even as we disrupt it. So photosynthesis is not some obscure scientific concept. It is not trivia for biology class. It is the foundation of your existence. You are alive right now because billions of years ago, some bacteria learned to split water and capture light. Every breath you take, every meal you eat, every wooden object you touch, every stable day of weather. All of this is a gift from photosynthesis, from plants that ask for nothing in return. They do not require payment, they do not demand gratitude, they just keep working, day after day, year after year, silently converting light into life, taking invisible gas and making it solid, releasing waste that we need to survive. And they are doing this right now, in every forest and field and garden outside your window, in the oceans, in the microscopic surface waters where phytoplankton float. Billions upon billions of chloroplasts are capturing photons, splitting water, fixing carbon, producing oxygen. This is not ancient history. This is not a process that happened long ago. This is ongoing. This is happening this second. While you have been reading this, trillions upon trillions of photosynthesis reactions have occurred. The tree outside your window just produced hundreds of glucose molecules. The grass in your lawn just released thousands of oxygen molecules. The phytoplankton in the ocean just fixed millions of carbon atoms. The world is humming with this activity. An invisible, silent, tireless conversion of light into life. And it never stops. As long as the sun shines and plants live, photosynthesis continues. You are part of this system. You are not separate from it. You are made of it. The atoms in your body were cycled through photosynthesis. The carbon in your bones was once in the air. It was captured by a plant. You ate that plant, or an animal that ate that plant. Now, that carbon is you. When you breathe out, you release carbon dioxide. That will be captured by a plant, converted to glucose. That glucose might become wood, or fruit, or grass. Years from now, someone or something will eat that plant. The carbon that was in you will be in them. We are all connected through these cycles, through the flow of carbon and oxygen and hydrogen, through photosynthesis linking all life together, plants and animals, predators and prey, humans and forests and oceans and air. This is not poetry. This is not metaphor. This is literal biochemistry. We share atoms, we exchange molecules, We are part of a single planetary system of flowing energy and cycling matter. And at the center of this system, driving everything, making it all possible, is photosynthesis. That simple, elegant, impossible, beautiful process. Light plus water plus carbon dioxide equals life. 6 molecules of CO2. 6 molecules of H2O. Light energy. Producing 1 molecule of glucose and 6 molecules of oxygen. A simple equation that contains the secret of everything. That equation is running right now in the cells of the leaf you can see outside. It ran 1 billion years ago in ancient seas. It will run 1 billion years from now if life survives. It is the most important chemical reaction on Earth. Maybe the most important chemical reaction in the universe. Because, as far as we know, Earth is the only place where photosynthesis happens on a planetary scale. Other worlds have rocks and water and atmospheres, but only Earth has this green transformation. Only Earth turns light into life so thoroughly, so pervasively, that it colours the entire planet. From space, Earth looks blue and green. Blue from water, green from chlorophyll, green from billions upon billions of chloroplasts, green from photosynthesis. That green is not decoration. That green is not background. That green is the colour of life itself. It is the colour of sunlight being captured, of air being transformed, of the impossible becoming real. And you are part of it. You are sustained by it. You breathe because of it. You eat because of it. You exist because of it. Every moment of your life is a gift from photosynthesis. So the next time you see a plant, any plant, take a moment to appreciate it. Not just as a pretty thing, not just as scenery, but as a miracle, as a quiet, tireless worker converting light into life, as a partner in your survival. That tree is making the air you breathe. That grass is pulling carbon from the atmosphere. That tiny phytoplankton cell in the ocean is producing oxygen molecules that might reach your lungs someday. They are working for you, not intentionally, not consciously, but effectively. And they have been doing this work for longer than humans have existed, for longer than mammals have existed, for longer than almost anything has existed. Photosynthesis is ancient. Photosynthesis is ongoing. Photosynthesis is essential. And photosynthesis is beautiful. Beautiful in its chemistry, in its efficiency, in its elegance, in the way such complex results emerge from such simple ingredients, in the way it connects everything to everything else. This is not just science. This is the most beautiful story ever told. The story of how nothing becomes something, how light becomes life, how 3 simple ingredients combined in the right way with the right molecular machinery create the foundation for an entire living world. A world with forests and fields and flowers, with animals and birds and humans, with breath and food and warmth, with everything that makes a planet not just habitable, but alive. And it is all happening right now, right outside, right this second. Photosynthesis, the quiet miracle, the invisible transformation, the gift that keeps giving. That is the story of photosynthesis. That is how plants convert light into energy. That is how they feed the world and oxygenate the planet and make life possible. And that is why it matters. To you, right now, every single day, every single breath. Because you are made of stardust, powered by sunlight, living because tiny green cells learned to split water billions of years ago. And that is not just science. That is poetry. That is truth. That is the most profound and humbling and amazing fact about being alive. Chapter 21. What happens when photosynthesis stops? We have celebrated photosynthesis. We have explored its beauty and complexity. But now let us consider something darker, something that should make us pause and think. What would happen if photosynthesis stopped? Not gradually, not slowly over millions of years, but suddenly, tomorrow. Imagine every plant on Earth lost the ability to photosynthesize. What would happen? The first change would be invisible. Plants would stop producing oxygen, but we would not notice immediately. The atmosphere contains enormous amounts of oxygen already. Enough to last for thousands of years, even with no new production. But plants would stop growing. They would stop making glucose. They would begin to starve. Within weeks, the smallest plants would die. Grasses would brown, flowers would wilt, leaves would fall. Within months, larger plants would follow. Shrubs dying, young trees collapsing, crops failing completely. Fields that were green would turn brown. Forests would become graveyards of dying wood. Herbivores would be the first animals to suffer. With no fresh plant growth, they would have nothing to eat. Rabbits and deer and cattle would starve. Insects that feed on plants would disappear. Within a year, most herbivore populations would collapse. Then carnivores would follow. With no herbivores to hunt, predators would starve. Wolves and lions and birds of prey would die. The food chain would disintegrate from the bottom up. Each level collapsing as the level below it vanishes. Humans would face catastrophe. All agriculture would fail. No wheat, no rice, no corn, no vegetables, no fruit. Livestock would die without feed. Store shelves would empty. Famine would be global and absolute. We might survive a few years on stored food, canned goods, grain reserves, but those would run out, and there would be no way to produce more. No photosynthesis means no crops, means no food, means starvation. Civilization would collapse, not because of war or politics or economics, but because the fundamental energy source that powers all life would be gone. Money cannot buy food that does not exist. Technology cannot manufacture nutrition from nothing. Within a decade, most complex life on Earth would be extinct. Only some bacteria and deep-sea vent organisms would survive. Earth would return to the barren state it had before photosynthesis evolved. A dead rock with a toxic atmosphere. This is not fear-mongering. This is simple consequence. Remove photosynthesis and you remove the foundation. Everything built on that foundation collapses. There is no alternative. There is no backup plan. Now, photosynthesis is not going to suddenly stop. That scenario is purely hypothetical. But it illustrates something crucial. How completely and utterly dependent we are on this process. How vulnerable we are to anything that disrupts it. And we are disrupting it. Not stopping it entirely, but damaging it, degrading it, reducing its capacity. Deforestation removes photosynthetic capacity. Every tree cut down is trillions fewer chloroplasts capturing light. The Amazon has lost almost 20% of its forest in recent decades. That is 20% less photosynthesis happening. Climate change is stressing plants. Heat waves kill forests. Droughts reduce plant growth. Changing rainfall patterns disrupt agriculture. Plants are photosynthesizing less efficiently in many regions because conditions are becoming too extreme. Ocean acidification is harming phytoplankton. As oceans absorb CO2 and become more acidic, some phytoplankton species struggle. If phytoplankton populations decline significantly, ocean photosynthesis would drop. Pollution damages plants. Air pollution, soil contamination, pesticides. All of these can reduce plant health and photosynthetic efficiency. A damaged plant does not photosynthesize as well as a healthy one. We are not stopping photosynthesis, but we are weakening it. At the same time that we need it more because we are adding extra CO2 to the atmosphere. We are increasing demand while reducing supply. This is not sustainable. We cannot keep damaging the systems that keep us alive and expect no consequences. The consequences are already appearing. More extreme weather, rising temperatures, disrupted agriculture. These are early warning signs. Photosynthesis is resilient. Life is resilient. Plants have survived 5 major mass extinctions. They have adapted to ice ages and warm periods and asteroid impacts. They will probably survive whatever we do. But will we survive? Will human civilization survive? That is less certain, because we are dependent on specific plants, wheat and rice and corn and soybeans. If climate change disrupts these crops too severely, we face famine. We are dependent on stable climate. If temperatures rise too high or rainfall patterns shift too dramatically, agriculture fails. Food production collapses. Billions of people face starvation. We are dependent on a functioning biosphere. If we damage ecosystems too severely, if we cause too many extinctions, the whole system can start to unravel. Complexity disappears. Stability vanishes. The world becomes harsher. This is the warning. Not that photosynthesis will stop, but that we are pushing the system that sustains us toward its breaking point. And we need to stop. We need to protect forests, not just because trees are pretty, but because they are infrastructure. They are the machinery that produces oxygen and absorbs carbon and stabilizes climate. Destroying forests is like destroying the life support system on a spaceship. We need to reduce emissions, not just because of abstract concern about future generations, but because every ton of CO2 we release is one more ton that photosynthesis must remove. We are overwhelming the system. We need to stop adding to the burden. We need to restore degraded lands, replant forests, rebuild wetlands, protect grasslands. Every ecosystem we restore is more photosynthetic capacity, more carbon absorption, more oxygen production, more stability. We need to protect the oceans, reduce pollution, prevent acidification, preserve marine ecosystems. The ocean is not just a resource to exploit. It is the lungs of the planet. Half or more of our oxygen comes from there. This is not environmental activism. This is not political ideology. This is survival. Photosynthesis keeps us alive. Anything that damages photosynthesis threatens us. Protecting photosynthesis is protecting ourselves. Chapter 22. Learning from plants. But let us shift from warning to inspiration, because photosynthesis does not just keep us alive, it also teaches us lessons, principles that we can apply to our own lives and technologies. First lesson: efficiency through simplicity. Photosynthesis uses 3 simple ingredients: water, carbon dioxide, light, nothing exotic, nothing rare, nothing expensive, just the most abundant materials available. Yet, from these simple ingredients, plants build everything. The complexity emerges from simple starting points. This is elegant design. This is efficiency. Compare this to human technology. We often pursue complexity. Rare materials, exotic processes. We build things that require specialized components from around the world, supply chains that span continents. But the most robust systems are simple. They use common materials. They work with what is available locally. They do not depend on fragile global networks. Photosynthesis teaches us to seek simplicity, to build complexity from simple foundations, to use what is abundant rather than what is rare. Second lesson: waste can be valuable. Plants release oxygen as waste. They do not need it, but that waste is essential for other organisms. What is garbage to one species is life to another. In human systems, we often think of waste as purely negative. Something to dispose of, something to hide. But what if we designed systems where waste from one process became input for another? This is called circular economy, industrial ecology, mimicking natural systems where nothing is truly wasted. Everything is recycled, everything flows to where it can be used. Photosynthesis shows us this principle. The oxygen we breathe is plant waste. The carbon dioxide we exhale is plant food. The cycle is closed. Nothing is wasted. Third lesson: patience and persistence. Photosynthesis is not fast. A plant does not grow 100 feet overnight. Trees take decades or centuries to reach full size. Growth is slow and steady, but over time the results are massive. A tiny seed becomes a giant redwood. A single cell of phytoplankton multiplies into trillions. Slow accumulation over long periods produces enormous results. In human life, we often seek quick results, fast success, immediate gratification. But the most meaningful achievements take time. Mastery takes years of practice. Deep relationships take years to build. Wisdom comes from decades of experience. Photosynthesis teaches patience. Keep working consistently. Trust the process. Small daily actions accumulate into massive long-term results. Fourth lesson: adaptation without redesign. We saw how CAM and C4 photosynthesis work. These are not new processes. They are modifications of the basic mechanism. Evolution did not start over. It tweaked what already worked. In our own lives and work, we often think we need to completely reinvent ourselves, throw everything out and start fresh. But usually, small adjustments to existing systems work better. Keep the foundation, modify the details, adapt to new conditions without losing what already functions. This is more efficient than constant revolution. Fifth lesson: cooperation creates abundance. Photosynthesis connects all life. Plants produce oxygen that animals breathe. Animals produce carbon dioxide that plants need. Decomposers break down dead matter, releasing nutrients that plants absorb. The system works because everyone contributes. Everyone plays a role. The whole is greater than the sum of parts. Human systems work the same way. Societies function when people contribute different skills. Economies thrive when exchange is mutually beneficial. Communities flourish when members support each other. Photosynthesis shows us that isolation does not work. Connection and exchange create abundance. When everyone gives and everyone receives, the whole system prospers. Sixth lesson: invisible work matters. Photosynthesis is invisible. You cannot see electrons moving through protein chains. You cannot watch carbon dioxide being fixed. The miracle happens at a scale too small for eyes to perceive, yet this invisible work sustains everything. The most important processes are often unseen. They happen quietly, without fanfare, without recognition. In human society, much essential work is invisible. Parents caring for children, teachers educating students, janitors cleaning buildings, programmers writing code that makes websites work. This work does not get celebrated. It happens in the background. But without it, everything collapses. Photosynthesis teaches us to value invisible work, to recognize that what happens behind the scenes matters as much or more than what is visible, to appreciate the quiet, steady, unglamorous labor that makes everything else possible. Chapter 23. Scientists who revealed the secret. Before we finish, we should acknowledge the humans who figured all this out. Because understanding photosynthesis was not easy. It took centuries of careful observation and clever experiments. The ancient Greeks noticed that plants grew larger over time. They assumed plants ate soil. This seemed logical. Plants grow in soil. They must be consuming it. In the 1600s, a Belgian scientist named Jan van Helmont tested this idea. He planted a small willow tree in a pot of soil. He weighed the soil. Then he watered the tree for 5 years, adding nothing but water. After 5 years, the tree had gained 164 pounds, but the soil had lost only 2 ounces. Van Helmont concluded that the tree's mass came from water, not soil. He was partially right. Water contributes hydrogen and oxygen to plant matter. But he missed the carbon. He did not know about gases. He did not know plants were pulling carbon from AIR. In the 1700s, scientists discovered different gases. Joseph Priestley, an English chemist, did a fascinating experiment. He put a mouse in a sealed jar. The mouse soon died from lack of air. Then he put a plant in a sealed jar with a burning candle. The candle went out. But when he left the plant in the jar for several days, then lit a new candle, it burned normally. The plant had somehow restored the air. Priestley had discovered that plants produce oxygen, though he did not call it oxygen yet. He called it dephlogisticated air. He knew it was the component of air that allows burning and breathing. A Dutch scientist named Jan Ingenhousz extended this work. He showed that plants only purify air in sunlight. In darkness, they actually consume the good air and release bad air. He discovered that light was essential to the process. A Swiss scientist named Nicolas de Saussure showed that plants absorb carbon dioxide and release oxygen. He measured the gases carefully. He proved that plants gain weight by taking carbon from air, not just from water. But nobody understood how any of this worked. What was happening inside plants? What was the mechanism? In the early 1900s, scientists figured out the chemical equation. Carbon dioxide plus water, powered by light, produces glucose and oxygen. But they still did not know the steps. How does this transformation happen? In the 1940s, scientists started using radioactive tracers. They could label specific atoms and follow them through chemical reactions. This was a breakthrough technique. Melvin Calvin and his colleagues at Berkeley used carbon-14, a radioactive isotope of carbon. They fed algae carbon dioxide made with carbon-14. Then they killed the algae at different time points and analyzed what compounds contained the radioactive carbon. This was painstaking work. They identified which molecules form first, which form next, tracing the path of carbon through the cell. Over years of experiments, they mapped out the Calvin cycle, the sequence of reactions that build sugar from carbon dioxide. Melvin Calvin won the Nobel Prize in 1961 for this work. The Calvin cycle is named after him. Other scientists worked out the light reactions. They discovered chlorophyll's structure. They found the electron transport chains. They figured out how ATP synthase works. In the 1960s and 70s, scientists used electron microscopes to actually see chloroplasts, to observe the thylakoid membranes, to visualize the structures we have been describing. More recently, scientists have determined the three-dimensional structures of all the major proteins involved in photosynthesis. They know the exact shape of rubisco, the precise arrangement of chlorophyll molecules, the architecture of ATP synthase. This knowledge came from thousands of scientists over hundreds of years, each building on the work of those before, each contributing a piece of the puzzle. And we are still learning. There are still mysteries, still details we do not fully understand, still questions about how to improve photosynthesis efficiency. Still possibilities for applying these principles to new technologies. Science is not finished. Discovery continues. But what we know now is already amazing. The detail and elegance and complexity of photosynthesis is stunning, and we figured it out through careful observation and clever experiments. This is the power of science. The ability to take invisible processes and make them visible, to understand the hidden mechanisms that run the world, to reveal the beauty and complexity of nature through patient investigation. The scientists who studied photosynthesis gave humanity a gift, not just knowledge, but understanding, the ability to see what our eyes cannot see, to comprehend what our ancestors could only wonder about. We stand on their shoulders, and now we can share this understanding. We can explain to anyone who will listen how plants turn light into life. how the impossible becomes real, how 3 simple ingredients create everything. Chapter 24. The Invitation to Wonder. We are near the end of our journey. We have explored molecules and cycles and global patterns. We have traveled from tiny chloroplasts to entire planetary systems. But let us finish where we started, with wonder. Because that is what photosynthesis should inspire. Not just understanding, not just knowledge, but profound AW at how the universe works. Think about what we have described. Photons from the sun, created in nuclear fusion 93 million miles away, travel through empty space for 8 minutes. They strike a leaf. They are captured by chlorophyll molecules. That energy excites an electron. That electron moves through a series of proteins. Each transfer of the electron pumps hydrogen ions across a membrane. Those ions flow through a spinning protein that makes ATP. The electron ends up attached to NADPH. Water molecules are torn apart, hydrogen is kept, oxygen is released, carbon dioxide is grabbed from the air. It enters a cycle that spins multiple times. ATP and NADPH provide energy. Eventually, glucose forms. That glucose is transformed into cellulose, into starch, into all the structures and compounds the plant needs. Animals eat the plant. Humans eat the plants and animals. The carbon cycles, the oxygen cycles. Energy flows from sun to plant to animal to soil and back again. This is not magic. We can explain every step with chemistry and physics. We can write equations. We can measure rates. We can visualize structures. It is all natural, all governed by the same physical laws that apply everywhere in the universe. But here is the thing. Just because we can explain something does not make it less wonderful. Understanding the mechanism does not diminish the miracle. If anything, it enhances it. Because when you understand how improbable this all is, how perfectly the pieces fit together, how elegant the system is, you appreciate it more, not less. The fact that chlorophyll absorbs exactly the right wavelengths of light, that ATP synthase spins like a turbine, that Rubisco can grab carbon dioxide from air that is 99.96% other gases, that water can be split by light energy. None of these things were designed by intelligence. They were not planned. They evolved through random mutations and natural selection, through blind trial and error over billions of years. Somehow, mindless processes stumbled upon this exquisite system. Somehow, chemistry alone discovered how to capture light and build life. That is astounding. You do not need to believe in anything supernatural to feel wonder. The natural world is wonderful enough. The fact that matter can organize itself into patterns that capture energy and reproduce and evolve, that is the deepest mystery. And you are part of it. You are not separate from nature. You are not an observer standing outside looking in. You are nature. You are patterns of organized matter. You are captured sunlight walking around. Every atom in your body was formed in a star. Some in the Big Bang, most in stellar fusion, some in supernova explosions. Those atoms drifted through space, eventually condensed into planets, were cycled through the biosphere, passed through countless organisms. Now they are you, temporarily arranged in the pattern called your body. Eventually, they will be released, return to the cycle. Someday, they might be part of a tree, or a fish, or another human. You are not a permanent thing. You are a process, a flowing pattern, like a whirlpool in a stream. The water molecules are always changing, but the pattern persists. The whirlpool has continuity even though the substance is different from moment to moment. You are like that. The atoms in your body are replaced over time. The cells die and are replaced. In 7 years, most of your body will be entirely new matter. But you persist. The pattern continues, and that pattern is maintained by energy. Energy from food. Energy that came from photosynthesis. Energy that originated in the sun. You are a dissipating structure. You take in energy, use it to maintain organization, and release it as heat. When you die, the pattern stops. The organization dissolves. The atoms disperse. But they are not destroyed. They return to the cycle. They become part of other patterns, other processes, other lives. This is not sad. This is beautiful. You are participating in something eternal, something much larger than yourself. The great cycling of matter and energy through the universe. And photosynthesis is your connection to that cycle. Plants capture the sun's energy and pull carbon from the sky. You eat plants. You use that energy and carbon to maintain your pattern. You release carbon dioxide and water. Plants absorb it again. You are breathing with the planet, in and out, taking in what plants release, releasing what plants need, back and forth. An exchange that connects you to every green thing. This is not metaphor. This is not poetry. This is literal biochemistry. You are physically connected to plants through the exchange of molecules, through shared atoms, through cycling energy. And when you understand this, really understand it deeply, it changes how you see the world. Trees are not just scenery. They are partners, collaborators in your survival. You need them. They provide what you cannot make yourself. Every plant deserves respect. Not worship, not religious reverence, but simple acknowledgement of what they do. Simple appreciation for their contribution. Simple recognition that you would not be here without them. So here is the invitation. Go outside. Find a plant. Any plant, a tree, a shrub, even a weed. Look at it closely. Really examine it. Touch a leaf. Feel its texture. Notice its color. And remember what is happening inside. Billions of chloroplasts, trillions of chlorophyll molecules, capturing photons, splitting water, fixing carbon, producing glucose, releasing oxygen. Remember that this plant is working right now, this moment, converting light into life, performing the miracle that sustains you, asking nothing in return. You can thank it if you want, or just acknowledge it silently, feel the connection, recognize the relationship. You and this plant are partners in the great cycle of life. Then take that awareness with you. Let it change how you see green things. Let it deepen your appreciation. Let it inspire you to protect what sustains you. Because photosynthesis is not just science. It is not just facts and figures. It is the foundation of everything you care about. Everyone you love. Every experience you treasure. All of it depends on this process, this quiet miracle, this transformation of light into life. And now you understand it, not just intellectually, but deeply. You have followed the journey from photon to glucose, from light reaction to carbon fixation, from molecular machinery to global cycles. You know the story, the most important story on Earth, the story of how plants convert light into energy that all organisms need. Carry this story with you. Share it if you can. Let it inspire wonder in yourself and others. Let it motivate protection of the systems that keep us alive. Because understanding photosynthesis is understanding life itself, how it works, where it comes from, what sustains it. And understanding life, truly understanding it, is the most valuable knowledge we can possess. That is the gift of this journey. Not just information, but connection. Connection to plants, connection to Earth, connection to the sun and the cosmos and the great flowing cycle of energy and matter. You are part of something magnificent, something ancient, something ongoing, something that will continue long after you are gone. Photosynthesis was here before you. It will be here after you. But right now, in this moment, you are participating in it. You are breathing the oxygen it produces. You are made of the food it creates. You are alive because of photosynthesis. Every breath, every heartbeat, every thought. And that is not just a fact. That is a miracle, the quiet miracle, the invisible transformation, the gift that keeps giving. Photosynthesis, the foundation of life, the conversion of light into energy, the process that turns nothing into everything. And now you know the story, the full story, from beginning to end, from photon to glucose to you. Remember it, cherish it, let it fill you with wonder. Because this is not just about plants, this is about you, about being alive, about being part of something larger and more beautiful than you ever imagined. Welcome to the story of photosynthesis. Welcome to understanding how life works. Welcome to seeing the miracle that happens every day in every green thing around you. The story is finished, but the process continues, right now, this second, in the plant outside your window. Go look, really look, and see the miracle with new eyes.